Hello and welcome to yet another session of Karen's Colours. I'm Dr. Karen and this is my Conversations in Colour. This week we're going to continue with the theme of looking at those colours that people choose for themselves as their strengths. This week we had a choice between two colours that are both chosen equally often as a strength for people who haven't already chosen either blue or red, which are, as I said before, the most commonly chosen colours. But the two colours are either orange or cyan. I thought we'd start this week with orange and leave cyan until next week. But before we start, I'd like to thank all those people who've taken the trouble to watch my videos. If you like them, please leave a comment. Leave a like, perhaps even share. And if you're so inclined, how about doing a subscription? It doesn't cost you anything. Right, so let's get started. This week, we're looking at the colour orange. Orange, as we know from what I've spoken about previously, is basically a colour of either crisis or having a lot of fun. It's a mixture. It's a mixture of red and yellow. And yellow we know is a colour of thinking and digestion of new information. And red is the colour of action. So basically orange means act and think in unison. Sometimes it's think before you act, and other times it's act before you think. And that's where the ideas of courage and also calamity come into play. It exists in the real world just as much as it exists in the internal world as the driver or motivation of activity. There's a problem with orange, though, as with all the other colours that have both the same top and bottom, and that is that it doesn't allow for very much change in the way in which people respond to the needs or drives from inside or from the things that happen in the real world outside of them that then trigger off those responses internally. In this particular situation, orange internally has to do with the need to survive at all costs. There are constantly a feeling of threat, a feeling of things that are challenges that need to be met and overcome. And as a strength, this becomes a mightily powerful way of conducting your life. You are able to meet challenges and you are able to overcome them. Orange in the real world, unfortunately, says that quite often you do so by reacting rather than thinking. But orange on orange means that you lurch from crisis to crisis and generally you overcome them because they are a strength. Now, when we look at the colour that most challenges or is the biggest obstacle against an orange person's strengths, we have the colour cyan. Now, cyan is that odd colour that I've mentioned before that has no idioms attached to it. And the reason it has no idioms is that it hasn't actually been accepted into the basic colour term lexicon. It doesn't exist there yet. Yet we know it's a colour. We know and recognise it as distinctly different from the other colours that we use in everyday parlance. We know that it's a type of blue, but we also know that that blue has just a tinge of green in it. That means, because we know about green being linked to values, that tinge of green allows for this person to become someone who is a communicator of values. Now, the interesting thing about the challenge to orange is that here the cyan is also the same colour top and bottom. And in both these instances, both for the orange and for the cyan, it shows a distinct rigidity in activity. As a challenge, cyan on cyan means that the person has real trouble in being able to trust others. It has trouble with being able to make friends and maintain those friends. People who have cyan as a difficulty tend to be fairly sociable people, but at the same time, they don't allow people to get close. They don't trust others, and they don't expect to be trusted themselves. And so therefore they keep to themselves. They are more often than not very silent about their own histories. And it's interesting that there is a high proportion of those people who choose orange as their strength. That is, they are able to survive all types of conflict and crisis and do so with aplomb. And then they will choose silence and separation from other people, a non-trusting type of existence in order to maintain that survival. Now, is that an unusual sort of response? Well, I'd like to suggest that it is. I'd like to suggest that it's a very common way of handling stressful situations. If you are constantly existing in a state of having to deal with one disaster or one crisis after another, then certainly you're not in the business of telling the world about it. Well, certainly not these people. The cyan on cyan means that internally the person feels isolated and frozen out of the sorts of activities that will normally allow them to engage with others. In the real world, yes, they are very truthful. They tend to speak truth to the extent that it actually causes them to be isolated. Yes, they don't tolerate fools easily. Whereas the orange on orange strength person is able to deal with all types of people equally and without any sort of consideration about whether or not they are good or bad people. They just are people. For the cyan, on the other hand, as the obstacle, the person is constantly seeking for truth and gets very hurt, very harmed by those that do not speak truth, because they themselves need to be able to trust others, and they have been lied to many times, they have been misled many times, they've been let down many times. Hence, they can survive the crisis, but that doesn't allow them to create and maintain a large friendship network. So what happens when we cross these two colours together? If you have a situation where you have cyan on top and orange underneath as the driving force, then this is a person who is trying very hard to overcome the latest challenge by, in the real world, talking about it. And that's not something that sits comfortably with an orange person. An orange personality is one that, while being quite sociable, does not necessarily do a lot of talking. Yet the cyan in the real world asks of them to make those connections, to create the sorts of supporters that will enable them to overcome the crisis. But because they themselves are fairly self-sufficient, as most orange on orange personalities are, this necessity for seeking out others to help them is something that becomes too overwhelmingly a challenge, and so eventually that particular combination disintegrates. As with all combinations of strengths and weaknesses crossing one another, they don't last for very long, and this is just an example of it. The opposite reading, where orange exists in the real world and cyan in the internal world, what we have here is a person who is feeling isolated and alone, friendless, and needing to find somebody to talk to about something, whatever it is that they happen to want to talk about. In the real world, however, that becomes a real challenge, because nobody that they meet is going to meet the standards of honesty and trustworthiness that personality craves. And so in the real world, quite often, trusting someone with your information means that you will be betrayed and or have an expectation of being betrayed, and so therefore you do not find that a comfortable position to be in. And in the end, those two ideas of trusting someone with your personal, your most intimate details, and having that trust betrayed is so overwhelmingly nasty for you that you retreat back to the orange on orange. That is, I can survive this, I'll just simply pretend it doesn't happen. And at the same time, you avoid the next situation where you're likely to have to interact with another person. And there you have it. Well, I hope this week's session has been informative for you. And if you've enjoyed it, please give it a like. Perhaps even, if you're so inclined, subscribe. Definitely leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you have to say about the colour orange as a strength. What have you learnt about the colour orange? Is it one of your favourites? Would it be one that you would choose as your strength? In the meantime, have a good week, and I'll catch you again next time with the colour cyan. Catch you then.